Hi, and welcome to the Connection Over Perfection podcast. I am Amber McCrae, your therapeutic nutritionist and host. Join me on a holistic healing journey where we explore the power of nutrition and connection for your overall well being, where we embrace connection over perfection. All right, beautiful souls, I've got someone super special for you today. Meet my friend Auron C. Stark. Now, not only is this guy a mastermind in all things herbalism, alchemy, and spiritual, yes, he is that cool, but every chat with him feels like a mini enlightenment session. Seriously, the way he sees the world is just mind-blowing and very encouraging. So today we're diving headfirst into the deep waters of attachment, emotional connections, and why they might just be the secret sauce to personal growth. Auron's got some serious wisdom on breaking away from what society thinks and embracing a holistic, true to you lifestyle. So, whether you're ready for change or you're just a bit curious, trust me, you won't want to miss this chat. Auron, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I really appreciate it. It's really exciting. I'm excited to be here. Like you said, all the conversations that we have tend to be top tier and thought provoking, and yeah, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to share one of our conversations with the world at large.
Yes, me too. So, can you share a bit about your journey and how it made you passionate about spiritual, medical, political education? So, I know that that's like a wide range, but really what I want to know is how you got to have the amazing brain that you have today and the way that you think.
That is quite the loaded question. I guess I would say I've kind of always been on the path that I'm on. I was lucky enough to be introduced to a very wide variety of spiritual information at a really young age. It's like I had some Christian influences in my family. I had some Eastern Buddhist esque influences. My grandmother taught me to meditate at a very young age. I was introduced to, I guess I wouldn't even say that I was introduced to herbs at a young age. Herbalism was just something that was always a part of my life, kind of like in the peripheral. I was born in the early 80s, and a lot of my early childhood I spent with great aunts, great grandmothers, my grandmother, and, a lot of those women, that was just their life, like a lot of them grew up growing their own food, knowing what remedies were in the environment around them. So in regards to that, it was kind of something that was always there. There was a nice solid foundation for me to build on. And then as far as, all the stuff with society and politics, and I always had a very scientific mind. So growing up, even though I had these spiritual and like natural foundations for my belief structure, I always still had a really inquisitive, really scientific, really skeptical mind. So I was obsessed with science when I was younger, and then as I got older and got more into understanding who I was as a person, both emotionally and psychologically, that turned into a space where those two worlds kind of met, because I was always trying to quantify or validate my spiritual and nature based mystical experiences with my scientific mind. And then I've been on my own for a really long time, and that's kind of where like the political and like society and like civic stuff came in. I got kicked out when I was 16, 17 years old, and I've been on my own ever since. And so there was a lot of important logic and analyzation and assessment going on in my life. Like when you're on your own, especially at a young age, there's a lot of you're always in survival mode. You're always looking over your shoulder. You're always trying to figure out your next move, make sure the bills are paid, make sure you're safe. And so I always thought it was really important to be fully aware of the laws and how laws work, and political rhetoric and political perspective. And over time, all of those things just kind of kept weaving together to a place where I'm at today. And that's, the interesting place that a lot of people are coming to, is that, science and spirituality have to overlap. Personal, emotional, spiritual, psychological, and political shit is all important to understand the full spectrum of not only society, but who you are as a person.
I think I hear you saying that for most of your life, for your whole life, basically, the spiritual and herbal parts of it have really just been natural for you. Whereas most people are coming into that and learning it, it's just something that has been part of who you are since you were little. Also, with just the way that your mind works, I think I hear you saying that because you were able to have such a wide variety of introduction of beliefs and maybe safety to really have an open mind, that allowed you to continue to question things and be curious about everything about yourself and the world. And that kind of just kept going throughout your life and led you to where you are, especially when you were on your own. It allowed you to do a lot of inner inner work.
No, inner work is absolutely exactly. It's a little bit more interesting than that because so the stuff that I was introduced to as a young child created almost like a core program foundation, and then there was a huge period in my life where very little of that was a part of my life. Like I actually didn't really get into herbalism until I was in my mid 20s. And what ended up happening was so I was on my own for a while, at 16, 17 years old. And then I went to college. I ended up, moving around and being super transient for a while. And then I had this really intense spiritual experience that ended me up in Las Vegas, of all places. And Las Vegas, for the first few years I was out there, was literally just me in my 20s partying, being an asshole. And I ended up spending some time in jail for a DUI. And then I ended up getting into massage when I got out of jail. And while I was doing massage, I tripped and fell into a very large, very loving, and very eclectic spiritual community that's actually based in Vegas. And then that is where I had my official introduction to alchemy. That is where I had my official introduction to, out in Vegas is where I became a Reiki master. And then when all of that happened, I ended up moving home to the East Coast. And that is where I got my throw into the herbal world. That's where I did my herbal apprenticeship for the first year that I was back. I think it was back in 2011. And then after doing a year-long apprenticeship, then I started building pretty much the rest of my life and my business around herbalism.
Okay, so what I think I hear you saying is that your childhood really laid that foundation for what is to come later in life. It, like you said, laid the groundwork. And then life happened and you circled back and really dove into herbalism and the spirituality. There was a lot of shit in between that you needed to go through
Yeah.
to get you to where you are today. Is that close?
100%, 100%. For better or worse, up until very recently, my life has pretty much been nonstop turmoil. And I think that part of the, you asked earlier about like how my mind works and how, I connect all these different things. And I think a lot of that comes from, survival mode, from being in chaos, right? From always having to look at a situation, figure out all the different key parts, and then make the best decision for, whatever you're trying to accomplish. And it's just interesting how so many people think that, the different parts of our life develop, independently. And it's like they really develop interconnectedly and overlapping. Like there isn't really a part of my life where like my spirituality, it might not have been the forefront. I might not have been, practicing or teaching or learning in the way that I am now, but it's like everything always was a little bit connected to every other aspect. So
Yeah, I think I hear you saying that really everything is connected. Every part of us,
absolutely.
everything,
That is definitely the boiled down way to go.
right? So how has understanding connection and attachment in your own life played a role in your journey towards healing and breaking free from those old patterns?
Oh, that's you got some great loaded questions. So the especially more recently in my life, specifically I would say within the past like 2 to 3 years, um, I've had a lot of really intense realization in regards to connection. So, everybody out there nowadays is talking about shadow work and going through these processes of breaking generational curses, healing trauma, all that stuff. And whenever you start really doing that work, what happens and what comes up is you realize that certain situations or certain thought patterns or certain emotional responses often come from a place that you completely forgot about, or you come from an event in your life that at the time didn't seem significant, or you haven't thought of in many many years. And when you start spending that time with yourself and looking at why you think certain things and why you feel certain things, you start to realize where those connections are. And once you realize where those connections are, you can pretty much assess how to deal with the results of those incidences. A great example is, a big part of my journey started in my early 20s when I read this book by James Redfield called The Celestine Prophecy. And in the Celestine Prophecy, it's this story about how the author had a series of synchronistic events and ended up going on this like last minute crazy journey to Peru. And one of the principles they talk about in the later part of the book is about how your relationships, right? And this is also something that's commonly discussed in psychology, but your relationships romantically are very much connected to your family unit and what you saw at a very young age growing up, right? And so it's like when we as individuals start to be like, okay, I can look at my relationships over my life and I can see these patterns evolving, right? And when you start to identify the patterns, then you can start asking yourself, all right, well, where did these patterns come from? How did this pattern start? I'll give an interesting example. I have a close friend that I've known most of my life, and we used to go long periods of time without seeing each other or without hanging out because I would get really frustrated. He was a very good friend, but he was a very shitty boyfriend. Like, he would always, start dating these girls. He'd bring them into our circle of friends, and then he would cheat on them, and it would be like all this unnecessary drama. And I used to get really mad at him about it. And it's like I'd stop hanging out and be like, bro, you're a fucking scumbag. You're a dog. Like, great friend to me, but you're being a piece of shit to the women in your life. Like, what the fuck, right? And what I didn't know at the time, and what I ended up finding out, years later when we had like a very long, drunken hangout session, was that as a young child, he watched his father cheat on his mother. Like, he was the youngest of a bunch of siblings, and so he was the one who was always home. And so when dad was sneaking out or making phone calls or sneaking girls over, he was the one that was seeing that. And at a young age, he didn't understand. And so he just, when we're young, we allow our environment to imprint these neurological and psychological and emotional patterns. So he just thought that was regular behavior, and it took him 35 years, before he got to a place where he was willing to look at his life and his patterns. And a huge part of that was because I held him accountable as a friend. I was like, I love you as a person. This behavior is unacceptable in my life and in my energy space. So like, if you want to be my friend, you need to stop being that person. And it took him a few times, but then he ended up meeting this girl that, like, he was in a place where he was able to communicate his understanding and his experience to her honestly. And like, they've been together for 5-6 years now. And, I think they're getting married soon. It's like, you have to be able and willing to look at the good and the bad parts of yourself and ask yourself, why am I like this? Why do I think this? Why do I feel this way? That's why we call it shadow work, is because it's dark and scary shit when you start asking yourself the questions that you've been avoiding your whole life.
Yeah, so I think I hear you saying that connection and attachment really plays a huge role and is really the root of so much of what we do in our life now. And this is why inner work, shadow work is such a big topic right now, because I think that we have this awakening of awareness or questioning so many people. And I don't know about for you, I see, really from the age of like 30 to 60, they're really just opening up and questioning so much of why they do the things that they do. And the importance in that is They want to change, but they don't know how. And if they're not self aware, like you were saying, you have to be able to become self aware to even recognize these negative cycles that you get caught in because of programming from when you were little. It is very subconscious. Is that close to what you're saying?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When you look into anything about human development, everything shows us that the first 7 years, right? You're pretty much a sponge. That's why children who are, exposed to, bilingual families, right? It's easier for a 4-year-old to learn two, three, four languages at the same time than it is for an adult to learn a second language, right? From the scientific or medical standpoint, from birth until about 6 or 7 years old, we only operate in theta brainwaves, right? So we have four different major brainwaves. We've got beta, alpha, theta, and delta, and we all start out in theta, and theta is the frequency that your brain operates in when you're dreaming, right? So everything that a child experiences up until about 7 years old, it feels and is perceived like a dream, and all of that information is being, it's like when you record a CD, right? A laser changes the crystals in the CD and makes it permanent. That's happening to us as children on a neurological level, right? So everything that we're experiencing, every fear, every joy, that's why, me personally, a lot of the work that I do with my clients is very trauma based and very anger, a negative emotional base, right? I'm helping people through a lot of these things. And a lot of people don't understand that you can be traumatized by something that isn't significant. Like when you hear the word trauma, a lot of people think that it has to do with physical abuse, sexual abuse, really extreme psychological abuse. And while absolutely that is the case, it's also the case that like you could have a moment where you were 3 years old and you go up to your mom and you ask for a cookie, and your mom's had a long hard fucking day and she turns around and yells at you, right? And now you grow up to be this kid who has a binge eating problem with sweets and an eating disorder. You know what I mean? Because at one point you really wanted a cookie and you were young and you were in all of your emotions and you had this feeling, and then that feeling was met with anger and aggression, and it upset you in such a way that it formed, a core, neurological response. And then that develops into emotional, psychological, all these things just keep overlapping. And then it develops into a behavior and a process and a part, it becomes a part of you. And all of that needs to be figured out. And then once it's figured out, it needs to be worked out. And I think that's part of the reason that so many people, have a hard time doing shadow work and doing spiritual work, is because it's the kind of work you have to do every day, all day long. And it doesn't ever necessarily get easier. You get stronger, but it's a lot, especially when society trains us to be, people don't want to admit it, but realistically, we're all slaves. We're born into this system where we have to go to school, then you have to get a job, you have to pay for a mortgage, you have to pay all your bills. There's no room left in our everyday lives for this type of thought process. And because we're not taught to do this work as we're growing up, we end up, it's like we end up dealing with, if you start your journey at 25 years old, spiritually and psychologically, well, guess what? You're dealing with 25 years worth of bullshit that you weren't processing and understanding and acting from that whole time. And when like you said, we've got this gap that's happening from 30-year-olds to 60-year-olds. And it's interesting because those are two very different generations. The people that are, it's like I just turned 40, and the people that are, 40 to 60 were made up of Gen Xers. And then I consider myself that weird pocket generation, that we're not quite millennials, but we're not quite Gen X, but we get the best of both worlds. And like, we're all coming from a place of healing from survival mode, right? Because Gen X's were latchkey kids. I couldn't count on two hands all of my friends that were in similar situations than me that we've been on. Like my friend Jackie just left here a little while ago. She was emancipated at 14 or 15, and that story was common when we were growing up. There was a whole bunch of kids I went to school with, and we were all on our own out the gate at a young age. And then you've got the millennials who are still trying to come into the same understanding of themselves and their spirituality and their psychology, but they're doing it from a place of being coddled their whole fucking life, right? So like they're like the Buddha when he goes out into the world. They had no idea how horrible the fucking world was, right? And now they're like, and we're out here like, yo, it's been horrible the whole fucking time, but we blocked it out and ignored it for 20 years. And now, so it's like, and then those two groups were evolving to the same place, but from such different perspectives that I think that's another interesting problem in society, is that we're all trying to get home, but we're taking different roads and we're arguing about it on the phone while we're walking down the, like, where are you? Where are you? I don't fucking know. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would say even the generation older than us is my mom is going through this. And so her programming is very different.
Is your mother a boomer?
So she was born at 64, 62, 64.
Oh, so she's a young, yeah, that's not a, what is she? So she's Gen X then?
I guess if that's what you would consider it. I don't really know exactly. Those kind of get meshed with the years because I was born in 82. And so I think technically I'm a millennial.
Right.
But I don't, it's that weird. I don't know.
Yeah, they try to label us that, but we.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, don't get me, that's a whole other 3-hour conversation, because they didn't start using the term millennial until we were adults. Right? Like Generation X, and then we were supposed to be Generation Y2K.
Yeah.
And then, you know what I mean? Like that's who we were. And then they started using the term millennial, and I'm like, I'm not a fucking millennial, because I remember people smoking on airplanes and fucking smoking sections in fucking restaurants. Yes. I had one phone in the house with one long cord.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, it's very weird. But yeah, it sounds like your mom is older Gen X.
Which is, I think, almost a whole different level as well. And so we have these 3 big generational shifts happening, all, like you said, all at the same time, trying to figure it the fuck out what we're doing. And it's beautifully crazy is what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
But I want to just circle back to what you were saying, because it's something that I'm really passionate about, and it was really important. So I want to make sure our listeners really hear it, is that, like when you were talking about trauma does not look the same. And when sometimes we hear big T, little t, it's all the same. When your body experiences an abandonment from somebody that you need, a core person in your life, there is fear that sets in and your body goes into survival mode. It could be, like you were saying, even just a small baby in the crib crying and mom and dad didn't get there fast enough. Your body actually remembers and chemically changes to keep you safe. And so we have a lot of these people who are like, oh, well, we compare trauma, or I didn't have something extremely huge go on in my life, so I don't feel like I'm on the same level. And there was this book that I read, or listened to rather, and it was What Happened to You. And it's actually interesting. It was by Oprah Winfrey and a neuroscientist. And it's not about what's wrong with me, because so many people I hear, what is wrong with me? Why do I do this? What is wrong with me? And like you were saying, it's not what's wrong with us, it's what happened to us. And understanding that everything that you do, literally every choice that you make, every pattern and habit that you create, stems from somewhere. And like you were saying, really getting to the root cause of that and understanding, get curious, why? What is happening? Where did that come from? Because it came from somewhere. It makes sense and it's valid. And like you were saying, to really get to there and then validate those parts of you, because in my opinion, that is what we're longing for. And why we still search and seek out and do these things is because those little kids, those little parts of us, are still not seen and heard. How do you feel about that?
That is a great summation. And I was just, my mind was just bringing me back to this really defining moment in my young 20s. I was having a house party, and we're all sitting around drinking and smoking and talking about life and philosophy. And it was the first time that I was ever able to really clarify and explain and communicate what the ego, or what in the spiritual community we refer to as the shadow self, was. And it was because of I want to say it was a scientific documentary that I'd watched about psychology. So the ego, or the shadow self, is formed when we're babies, right? So when you're in the womb, you are receiving everything that you need, right? You get all of your nutrients, all of your waste is taken away. Like, you're a part of your mother's body, right? So everything's kosher. When you're born and you're now outside of the womb, you now have to behave in a way that gets you attention to get what you need. When you're hungry, you have to cry to get fed. When you have pooped yourself, you have to cry to get changed, right? And so what's happening there in those early developmental stages is you are learning the first most fundamental thing that we all learn is that I can get what I need by manipulating my environment with my behavior. And that then turns in, but then there's also all of these other factors, right? The emotional energy that's in your house, right? Like, are people in your space fighting? Are people in your space loving? Are people, it's like all of those other things will start to influence how that shadow or how that ego develops. And then once you understand that, you can start to trace back, all right, well, when somebody says or does something like this is my response. Right. And you said it perfectly. So many people overburden themselves with the question of, like, what's wrong with me? Right. The question you always want to ask yourself whenever you're on a journey, and any type of journey, the question is always why. And the cool thing about this body and this experience and this thing we call life is that your higher self, right? The part of you that is divine, the part of you that is your soul, will always answer first. So, like, whenever you need to know something about yourself, all you have to do is get into a quiet space, take a couple of slow, deep breaths, and ask yourself that question. And then be aware that you're going to hear the answer inside you're going to hear a response. And that first response is always going to be the God-given truth. And then your shadow is going to try and tell you what it wants to tell you. And that's going to be not the truth. Right. And there's all this talk about killing the shadow or separating from your ego or any of that stuff. And that's not the way to go about it. The reality of it is your shadow is only trying to protect you. Right. And so even though it's not telling you the truth, it's telling you what it thinks the truth is. And it's also telling you what it thinks you need to hear to protect you from repeating previous mistakes. The example I like to use with my clients is the dating example, right? Like, let's say you're in a relationship and you get cheated on, and it breaks your heart, and you're single for a while, and then you decide to start dating again. And then you go on a date and you hear that little voice in your head that, like, says, oh, they're probably a cheater, or they probably don't like you. And that's not your shadow telling you something to hurt your feelings. It's telling you something because it's trying to protect you from experiencing the hurt that it remembers from the last relationship, right? Your shadow is, the reason we call it a shadow is because it's the echo or the leftover from everything that you've experienced in the past. And when you start to understand that and you start to approach and communicate with that part of yourself in that manner, that's when we start to have growth. That's when we start to have evolution. That's when we start to have healing and release of old patterns and old traumas.
Yeah, I love that. And literally, I could talk about this with you for hours. So, just because this shadow work and the ego and all of this is a really lot sometimes for people who are new to this type of language per se. The way that I kind of learned it and heard it, I think it was Gabrielle Bernstein actually, which I read her book Spirit Junkie, was a game changer for me because she kind of broke it down in very simplistic form. So the way that she kind of told it was that our ing, or our inner guide, is love,
Mhm.
and our ego is fear. So we're born in love, and we have to use fear as the world happens to us and around us. Now, a lot of people think that fear is bad or negative. Like you said, a lot of people want to sever the shadow parts of us, or the dark parts of us, or the part that is fearful. When in reality, we need fear. Fear keeps us safe in a lot of situations. You know, fear keeps you from running out into the street in traffic and getting hit by a car. Somebody said that fear needs to be with you on your road trip, on this journey, but it needs to sit in the back seat, and it can't even touch the fucking radio. Like, we need fear, we need ego, that part of us, to help guide us, but not lead us in the direction that we are going. Like you were saying, we need to be aware of all of these things that are happening to us previously so that we can understand these patterns, but we don't need to let it lead us. Like in the example of the relationship where that fear comes up of being cheated on in the past, we can understand that is our body and our mind trying to keep us safe from that situation, but that it doesn't specifically pertain to this relationship, and being able to separate the two.
Right. So I would just add on to that. It's the way that I see it perspectively is that it's not about separating from your ego or shadow, it's about integrating, right?
Yeah, I love that.
So if you look at your shadow as the part of you that is like a young, uneducated teenager, they're just shouting out the answer based on what they've seen and felt, right? And it's our job to turn around and talk to that shadow, that younger, less evolved part of ourselves, and be like, no, like for example, when that, we'll stick with the relationship example. When you hear that voice that's like, oh, he's probably going to cheat on you. This is shadow work, right? You got to turn to your shadow and you got to say, just because Joey cheated on us doesn't mean that everybody's a cheater. You have to understand and accept that these other parts of ourselves are valid living parts of ourselves. And in order for us to integrate and heal the negative shit that formed that perspective in our hearts and minds, we have to be willing to have that conversation with that lesser part of ourself, right? And when you do that, when you offer up an alternative, you're familiar with the NLP, tapping, neuro-linguistic programming?
I've heard of tapping.
Right. So that whole process is about resetting that part of yourself, right? And you're doing that through verbal cues and physical cues because everything overlaps, mind, body, soul. And when we start realizing and accepting that that little voice in our head doesn't have to always say fucked up shit, you can teach that voice to say good shit. You can teach that voice to support you. The only reason it doesn't support you and the only reason it does say negative shit is because you let it go your whole life without ever communicating with it. So it feels like a left alone, abandoned, fucking pissed off teenager, you know? And once you start integrating and addressing it as such, you then have the ability to heal and rearrange where that energy and where that voice brings you when shit pops up.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think I hear you saying that it's more of validating that still small voice, validating that part of us, whether it was teenager or child or whatever comes up from that fear, is validating that, saying, hey, I see you. I see what happened to you. We're not in that right now. So
Mm-hmm.
I love you, but you're good.
Exactly. Your shadow self is always viewing through a lens from your past. And it's always trying to make you, it's got this, it's like what are those things we had when we were kids, the little picture turners? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
The where you pull the
I
lever and it
do.
changes it's like your shadow is trying to make you look through that type of lens. And you're like, no, we're not there anymore. right? Like we're not in that space. We're not looking at that thing. We're looking at something totally new. And I like what you said about it. It's absolutely about validation, right? Because that part of you that's yelling like, "Oh, he's probably a cheater," right? That's the part of you, that's the part of yourself that hasn't been healed from that trauma yet. So when you take the time to turn around and be like, "All right, listen, that fucking sucked. Getting cheated on broke my heart. Being betrayed, being lied to, all of that shit was awful. I see you and I validate what you went through, but that's not everything we're going to go through moving forward." It's a really
Yes.
weird, hard clarification because you're addressing these parts of yourself as if they're outside yourself, but they're in you, and like you've never been taught to do that kind. That's why this work is so hard and so complicated,
Right.
and why so many people turn away from it, because it takes all of your mental and emotional capacity to process, and then everything else you have left, that's what you got to give into it to get the healing out. It's exhausting.
It is exactly what I was just going to say. It is exhausting. And because, like you were saying, these thoughts and these voices and these programmings and, ourself from all of prior is communicating with us. And we are on a constant loop of either listening or validating it or telling it to shut the fuck up, or, all of these things all day long. We are at war with in this process with ourselves, and then to have to also be out in the world and do the rest of the shit that we have to do. Like you said, society, I believe that it's planned partly that way, that to be exhausted so that we continue to stay disconnected from ourselves and disconnected from one another. I fully believe that.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the conversation, and when we first started talking about all these other things and how they overlap, everything that you just said is the part of it that ties into politics, right? Because it was planned that way, right? They, over the past 100 years, they have systematically removed our knowledge and understanding of natural healing. They have forced us into an industrial workforce that takes up a third of our lives. And then on top of that, they removed our ability to develop naturally and spiritually by forcing institutionalized churches and religions on us. And now all of those things are overlapping, right? Because it's like you go back 50, 100 years, people weren't working 8-hour work days. That was only a mid to late 1900s thing. Thank you, Henry Ford. It's like people were spending the majority of their time growing their food and being with their families, right? And doing what they loved and what they were passionate about. And then you also worked or bartered or traded to make the money that you needed for whatever else you needed. This entire current system was, I mean, everything from the medical system to the industrial workforce to, the current political structure that we have. In my humble opinion, it was all specifically designed to prevent us all from being, it's like I'm on the elk that I believe that this body is meant to be an immortal vessel for, artistic exploration and creation. Like, I think this entire life is supposed to be about, like you said, we are born in love. It is about love. It is about passion. It is about creativity. It is about beauty. And they have systematically over the past 100 years stripped all of that from everyday life, which is why everybody across generations is going through not only this mass awakening, but this massive dark night of the soul. It's like everybody is realizing that there is no meaning in all of the crap that we were told and taught and all the things that were expected of us. And now we're trying to figure out how to get back to, natural harmonic existence in nature.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I hear you saying that this life is meant to be lived, not survived. Is that close? What a concept.
100%. Very well said.
That leads me to my next question is how can holistic practices like herbalism influence, mental, spiritual, and social well-being in today's society?
So it's not even so much that I think it's going to influence it into society. I think it's that by engaging and practicing in herbalism and natural health, which includes both physical fitness and meditation, I think what happens is people return to their natural state. The problem with our world is that all of those things have been taken from us. And it's been taken from us so generationally that a lot of people don't even have access to the information. So there's people out there today that every aspect of their life is this negativity and this survival, and they don't even have access to anybody in their family or in their extended lives that understands what life is supposed to be. And when you talk about specifically herbalism, right? So you and I have had the conversation about parasites, about, nutrient deficiency, all of these things. And that's what herbalism provided, right? Herbalism was most of the problems that people have today are chemical. If it's not chemical, it's gut health, right? Like your depression, your anxiety, your manic state, your ADD, which isn't fucking real, by the way. All of that stuff is a result of malnutrition, parasitic infection, and having an unbalanced spirit. So anybody who engages in any of these practices, either singly or collectively, is going to immediately start to see a change in their lives. It's like when you start drinking willow bark tea instead of taking aspirin for headaches, right? Or when you get farther and you start to realize that headaches are caused by mineral deficiencies and dehydration, and it's like when you start to take care of our bodies in the same way that we take care of our cars, that's when you start to realize that, like, oh, there's all of these other things I could be doing. And if I was and it's nobody's fault because nobody taught you that shit. It's like people like you and I are prime examples. I had to have experiences in my life that led me to a place where I needed and wanted to get this information. And
Exactly.
now that I've gotten this information and I have firsthand anecdotal experience, I can share that with other people. Like prime example, when I was a young boy, I had horrible asthma. Asthma almost killed me several times in my life. And I used to get hospitalized anywhere from 3 to 5, sometimes 7 times a year for my asthma attacks. And the first thing I learned in herbal school was that asthma is directly connected to adrenal function. And my teacher gave me a fucking tea that's made from a plant that everybody where I live considers it a weed. I literally drank that tea for 30 days and I haven't been hospitalized for my asthma since. You know what I mean? Like these are the types of things. It's like curing people doesn't make more customers. And our entire medical industry is a pharmaceutical based profit machine. I have a friend, if you, I don't know if you know her or not, Bannon Shannon. She's on like her 30th account or some shit because aside from her political rhetoric, she talks about how she cured her stage 4 cancer with an herbal tea remedy that she got from the local natives in her town. You know what I mean? You can't say shit like that because cancer is $1 billion industry. But at the end of the day, every single thing out there that we call a disease is not a disease. It is a symptom. I don't care if it's fibromyalgia. I don't care if it's Lou Gehrig's disease. I don't care if it's liver failure. All of the things that we consider diseases that we go to doctors to give us quick fixes for is literally because of a condition. It is a symptom of something that has been going wrong in your body for a long time, and you are now at your body's final straw, and it can no longer course correct. And when you start bringing all that information in, you start realizing that as long as you don't get hit by a bus or shot in the face, this body is designed to be immortal. There's no reason for it to age. There's no reason for it to get sick, except for the fact that we've been poisoned mind, body, and spirit since the day we were born.
Yes, I love everything you said. That was huge. So I just kind of want to recap that and go over a few things. So I think I hear you saying that with, labels such as ADHD, like you were saying, in my opinion, words play such a powerful role in our healing process as well. So when you have somebody that you call a patient and they call themselves a patient, they are in a state of victim mentality. They are in a state of unhealed. So already their mental state and their frequency are that I am sick. And so
Mm-hmm.
then when you tell them they are sick, and then you add on layers that keep them there, and then you don't address them as a whole person. So, in my opinion, when we take the DSM 5, when we take any label, if we take any diagnosis, whether it's depression, anxiety, ADHD, whatever, we are not looking at the whole person and addressing them. This is why we have so many issues. Like we were saying, everything is connected. Hunter, we love you. We know that that is all about you. Everything is connected. Is that if we give them medicine, say we give them pills, right, for ADHD, but we don't address their attachment history or the trauma that they've been through, that alone right there is already disregarding that person, and you are not going to get the healing that they need.
Well, hold on. I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there because if you're going to use the ADHD as an example, the reality of it is ADHD is a completely fabricated thing that's not real. And the only drug that they give people for ADHD is literally government sanctioned crystal meth. So it's what they do is they take a normal boy or girl, and with ADD and ADHD, it's predominantly young boys, right, who are meant to be outside playing and doing physical things and engaging all the different parts of this machine, right? And they try to put them into a fucking classroom for 8 hours. And then that little boy doesn't fit in that spectrum because that's not what little boys are supposed to be doing. So they give you a horrible medication prepubescently that's going to turn you into a drug addict as an adult. Like that is my favorite example of the entirety of the pharmaceutical industry, because there is not a single thing that you can get pharmaceutically that you can't either get an alternative or a treatment that is natural that will deal with that shit. You want to know how you cure ADHD? Stop putting fucking 7-year-old boys in school for 8 hours a day under fucking lights that fuck with their hormonal systems, and definitely stop giving them synthetic crystal meth before they've even started puberty, because like it's oh my god, it's so overwhelming. It's so infuriating.
Right. Well, and it's invalidating just the way that they learn, the person that they are, that we're all different, right? So you're talking about school, and this kind of goes into everything, is like when we're talking about labeling, is they want to box everybody into this neat little box, right? And if you don't fit in that
Mm-hmm.
box, you get this label, right? That's kind of where I was going with that, is that you're not being seen as the person that you are. We're all very different. I 100% agree with you that, all of, especially boys, right, are labeled this ADD or ADHD where they can't focus or concentrate. But we're only looking at one modality of the way of teaching, and we're not teaching for kids to learn to love learning. You're shoving information down their throat to pass a test. There's two very different things that you're trying to accomplish there. So when you're trying to make all of these people fit into this box, and then they don't fit into this box, they're wondering, hey, what is wrong with me? And it goes back to, again, making people feel like that there is something wrong with them, when a lot of the time people with ADHD, or have that hyper focus, unable to really sit still, those types of things, whatever you want to call that fits under that umbrella of that label, is because that's the way that your fucking brain works. It also has to do with how you have lived your life. If you have had anxious parents, guess what? You're going to be probably anxious,
Yeah.
right?
We are clones of our parents. That's why all this stuff falls under the idea of generational curses. If your parents went through something emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually traumatizing and they didn't fucking deal with it, guess what? You're literally made up of their cells, and memory is stored in the cellular body, right?
Exactly.
So when you're born, you literally have, like, it's not just karma, which is like this weird energetic idea of bullshit that comes down the line at you. You have literally genetic information in every cell of your body that's
Yes.
based on everything your dad went through in his life and everything your mom went through in his life. And that's why
Yes.
that, when you do that extrapolation, it ties back into the earlier part of the conversation, right? Like how we behave romantically is what we saw romantic love look like as a young child. It goes out even farther than that and goes back generations, right? Like if your family, if let's say, I just went through this with a client probably 2 months ago. She had there was generational rape trauma in her family. Her mother had been horribly sexually abused. She had been horribly sexually abused. And then, something happened where a shitty situation with her daughter happened, right? And she was trying to figure out, like, I don't understand. Like, I thought I had dealt and I had helped, it's like I had healed this in myself. And I was like, yeah, but you have to understand it's a genetic marker, right? Same thing with, like, people think that, like, physical abuse, right? Like if your grandpa used to beat your mom and then your mom beat you, and it's not just an outward physical pattern. It's also the memory information that's in your cells.
Mhm.
And when we heal something like that in ourselves, then we prevent us from passing it on to future generations. And if you heal it within yourself after you've already had a child, when you heal it within yourself, then the spiritual aspect takes over, and that energetic healing passes on and removes it from the line.
Yeah, that's huge. And, kind of to circle back with that to earlier, is that when we're talking about healing and when we're talking about everything is connected, if you are trying to work through depression, if you're trying to work through all of these things, any label that you've received, it is going to take nutritionally, it's going to take doing the shadow work per se. It's going to take spiritual work. It's going to take all of these things to really be able to get to the root and continue to live that out in a different way. I think that in society, we are searching for such a quick fix, which is why we have all of these pills. I mean, we've been programmed for quick fixes. If you look at TikTok, 3 minute, we're just, our attention span and
Mm-hmm.
all of that is going smaller. But again, that's a whole other conversation. But in order to do this work, in order to really work through anything that you're going through, is going to require time and to get uncomfortable. That is just the nitty gritty of it. And so when we're in this spiritual community and people talk about that it's supposed to be easy and just flow and that it's a beautiful transition, that tells me that they really haven't done the work.
That tells me that they have never had a dark night of the soul.
Right?
Right, like, oh yeah. And I always like to throw out the warning too, because there's a lot of grifters out there in the spiritual world, right? Like, there's people who, like, they hear something and they see that it's, successful, and then they just regurgitate it, and they haven't necessarily been through it themselves. It's like, I like to reiterate to people, like, I just turned 40 years old, and I've been on this journey consistently for 15 years, and before that it was sporadically for 20 years, and it's there's a discouragement that happens, and I am so big into the concept of baby steps, right? So, like, for anybody out there who's listening who, like,
Yes.
is on this journey and they feel overwhelmed, or they feel like they're never going to accomplish anything, like, you have to start out super small. You have to start out with, like, trying to meditate once or twice a week if you've never meditated before, right? And then that goes up to 3 or 4 times a week, and then that gets up to daily. Like, you literally have to work yourself up, because whether you're trying to heal mental, physical, emotional, spiritual trauma, at the end of the day, I always use the reference, it's like going to the gym, right? If I'm going to go to the gym and work out, I'm not going to walk into the gym and pick up a 50-pound dumbbell and be able to do 25 reps, right? That's fucking psychotic. I need to go in. I might have to go in and pick up a 20-pound bell. I might have to go in and pick up a 5-pound bell. And I might have to work that 5-pound bell every day for a month before I can pick up and do the same thing with a 10-pound bell, right? And this journey is no different. So, like, whatever it is that you're looking to deal with, do not beat yourself up over the fact that you're not going to get that instant fucking quick fix. And I wanted to touch on something else you said earlier. You mentioned the placebo, like, where you start when you're, where your mind is when you start a journey is huge. People don't understand, and a lot of people don't know, but the placebo effect is still considered a theory only because every time they do the experiment, it works, right? So there's no control. Like there's no experiment that they've ever done involving placebo that failed for them to compare it to. So science won't label it a fact until there's a control in the scientific method. And at the end of the day, every time any scientific study has used a placebo effect, it has been positively beneficial and has healed and worked. And that's in physical illness, that's in mental illness, that's in emotional and psychological illness. Like it's all had experiments, and every single time a placebo is used, it has absolutely worked. And when you start to understand that, then it kind of ties into that bullshit that we thought was bullshit when we were kids. And they're like, you can do anything. You can. Absolutely. You actually fucking can. You just have to have enough people around you that are supporting you so that you can believe what you're attempting to accomplish. Because if you don't believe, it's there. I forget who the quote's from. Somebody, I'm sure somebody's going to, come at me for it, but there's this fantastic quote, and it says, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you are right.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it, in my opinion. That's the boiled down sum of all of it.
Yes.
Right? The first step is believing that it's possible, and then the rest is just whatever comes next.
Yeah, so you touched on so many things. So I just want to go back, and I think I hear you saying that this journey is a beautifully fucked up, crazy, scary, awesome journey, and that it does get easier in the sense that you get stronger and you don't stay in those tough moments as long, but that those moments don't ever completely go away. We're never completely cured from the things that we've gone through. We're just more able to process them and validate them faster so that they don't overtake and become such as depression, and we don't stay in those moments. Is that close?
Absolutely. A great way to paraphrase it would be, I always compare trauma healing to the grief process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2015, I lost my older sister. She was one of my, one of the closest people, most important people in my life to me. And, for 6 months after she passed away, there wasn't a day that went by where I didn't have a horrible sobbing fucking breakdown. And now, 8, 9 years later, I still have my moments. There's absolutely times when I still break down and cry about it, but that breakdown and that cry only lasts for a few minutes, 15 at the most. As where before it was 3 hours of my day is now fucking gone because I couldn't do anything but lie there and fucking sob, right? What happens is her death isn't any less significant. Her absence in my life isn't any less, but I've gotten stronger at dealing with it, at holding it, at understanding it, right? And the same thing applies to anything you're trying to accomplish in your life, whether you're trying to, lose weight and get physically healthier, whether you're trying to heal some abuse from your childhood, whether you're trying to correct some, behaviors that you developed because you were in a relationship with a narcissist. It all starts with understanding that it's just that first step, and it's just about your belief. All the time that I was grieving my older sister, I knew that I was going to get better at it. I've lost people before, I lost my grandparents, I lost my great aunts, I've lost countless friends in my life, and it's horrible every single time. But then once you've gone through it a couple times, you're like, okay, it's like we talked about earlier, when you talk to your shadow and you remind your shadow, it's like, okay, remember, we've done this before, right? Like we lost so-and-so and it was awful, and like we got through it, and you remind yourself. And then the next traumatic loss that you have isn't as bad because it's one of my other favorite quotes. You have survived 100% of your worst days. And that shit like is astronomically profound when you really think about it, because that means that your batting average is fucking perfect. How valuable would you be as a baseball player if every fucking pitch that came your way, you fucking home runned it, right? And that's what people forget, is that that's you. That's you in your life. You are batting 100 because you have 100% survived 100% of the worst days of your life. And then when you start to look at it like that, you're like, oh, then you realize that like nothing is ever going to be as bad as some of the worst shit that I've already been through.
Yeah, I love that. And I am all about baby steps. So whenever time you say that, I just get chills because I'm like, yes, baby steps. Because I think that goes back to the way that our brains work. You know, most people need baby steps. This is why when you see people making New Year's resolutions and all of these big goals and they never make them, is because our brains, most people's brains were not wired for making these really big goals and then just stepping into them. It's about the little teeny steps that we make every day that get us to those big goals. And there's two things that you said in what you were saying that I think is really important, is the baby steps, and also that faking it till you make it, basically, right? Is that it is real. That placebo effect is because when you are taking one baby step at a time in the direction that you want to go and changing one thing in that direction, instead of saying, I'm not a morning person, and you say, I am a morning person, that's one baby step. Just, you're not even waking up. You're literally just changing the way that you say it in your thought process. You are creating new neural pathways in your brain. You are creating a new pathway for your brain to begin to cycle on where it's been stuck in an old pathway. And so we have to be able to do that small step over and over and over again to create a new neural pathway, a new way of doing something. And a lot of people, again, get frustrated because they're like, what is 5 minutes of meditation going to do? What is 5 minutes of working out, right? I always get that from my clients. And I'm like, listen, if you do 5 minutes all week, that will be more than you've done all week, because your brain was telling you you had to do 30 minutes and you're like, fuck that shit, I'm not doing it. Right?
Well, so there's I'm gonna shift that perspective a little bit on both of the things you just said. One is that I used to be a huge proponent of fake it till you make it. Now, fuck that shit. It's not fake it till you make it, because when you tell yourself that you're faking it, you're accepting that it's not real and that you have to push through the unrealness to get to the accomplishment. What I would say is, instead of faking it till you make it, instead of going from saying I'm not a morning person to saying I am a morning person when you're not there yet, because you're lying to yourself at that point. What you say is that I am becoming a morning person. I am doing my best to become a morning person. You got to say a true statement at the baby step level to motivate yourself to get, because if you lie to yourself, then your shadow's going to come out and be like, that's not fucking true. And you're like, you're right, that's not fucking true. And then you're in a conversation where you're believing the bullshit your fucking shadow told you, right?
I love that.
And then the second part, what did you the other big part about when you're what you said about the 5 minutes, right? You're like, oh, if you do 5 minutes every day, you've done more than you've done all week. And it's like, if you're not working out at all and you do five, or if you're not meditating at all and you meditate 5 minutes every day for a week, you've meditated infinitely more than you have ever in your life. And when you look at it like that, that's a huge accomplishment right there. All of a sudden, you've got this massive goal that you didn't even know you had, and you accomplished it, and you get the dopamine release for it.
That's what I was going to say, is with baby steps, you get baby wins, which are teeny hits of dopamine. And your body needs that to keep going. It's just, it's not bad, it's just what it is when we get that dopamine hit, we want to keep going. So give your body what it wants and needs to keep going. There's nothing wrong with feeling good and winning, and even at these little things. And I really, really love what you said, because it took it to almost this other micro level, is that a lot of people have a hard time saying something that they don't feel is true. But if you switch that wording just slightly to I am becoming, they might be able to feel more connected to that. And then it will begin to, like you said, not be a lie. They won't have this battle with themselves because they are working on it by even doing the act. So I absolutely love that.
Right. Yeah. One of the most important things that I stress with all of my new clients from the beginning is how important it is to remove the word try from your vocabulary. Because when you say the word try, you are admitting to, like, if I say, I am trying to be a healthier person, you are backwards, like side slapping yourself and communicating to the universe that you're not healthy because I'm trying. When you try something, you're automatically accepting the that you're not there yet and that you haven't accomplished it. So when you switch it from a place of try to I am becoming, or I am doing my absolute best to accomplish, you got to, you sometimes it sucks because you have to bring out more words and you got to extenuate the statement, but that little shift in self communication takes you from a place of trying to lie to yourself, which just feels fucking stupid and wrong, to accepting that you've made a decision to do something and that you are absolutely doing it every single day, even if it's only a little bit.
I love that. I love that. So that brings me to my last question is, do you have a go-to recommendation or a simple step, we kind of talked about some, that someone can take right now to start breaking free from societal molds and that old programming? And I did hear my friend said it's not old programming if we are currently still using that same programming. So,
It's active programming, right? So
yes,
if
exactly.
I had this, I mean, there's so many little things that you can do on a daily basis to help stop old programming. Breath work is probably the easiest and the most important, right? Like, here's a prime example, right? Because I used to be a cigarette smoker. And anytime a cigarette smoker gets stressed out, what do? They go out and they take a fucking smoke break, right? And they think that it's the nicotine that's helping them relax, but what it really is, it's the 10 to 20 slow deep breaths that you take to get that nicotine into your blood, right? So whether you're dealing with anger or depression or sadness or whatever it is, right? The biggest thing is taking that moment, right? When you hit that stress point, taking that moment, disconnecting yourself from everything and just taking 10 slow deep breaths, right? And if you so it's like, in fact we'll do 3 right now just to prove it. So anybody who's listening, I want you to stop what you're doing, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to just take 3 breaths as slow as you can, right? And we're going to breathe in through our nose. When your lungs are full, I want you to hold your lungs full of air and count to 3 in your head, and then exhale as slow as you can. And then when your lungs are empty, hold them empty and count to 3 in your head. And we're just going to do this 3 times, all right? So we're going to start now. We're going to go in through the nose. When your lungs are full, you're going to hold your breath. And you're going to slowly exhale. Then you're going to hold your lungs empty and begin the cycle again. In through the nose and hold. Exhale. Hold your lungs empty. And one more time. In through the nose. Now, just after 3 simple breaths like that, it's impossible to deny how different you feel on the other side of that. Now, imagine if you did 10 breaths like that, which only takes about 40 seconds of your day. Every time you got mad, every time you got depressed, every time you got, any sort of emotional response that's going to dictate the activation of current patterns that you're trying to break, by doing that breath work, you've just interrupted that pattern. You've just interrupted that signal. You just interrupted that system of operation. And now you're back in the driver's seat and you can make a new decision that's outside of that active programming.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. And I just want to say that that is a beautiful way to end this episode. You have been absolutely amazing. I'm so thankful, and I always learn something from our conversation. So for me today, the biggest nugget I think was just that in between, that shift in that baby step wording when we are talking about a new program shift that I am becoming. So thank you. I appreciate
You're absolutely welcome. It's my honor and pleasure to be of service. I hope everybody listening gets something good out of today. I hope that we are still on the trajectory to, create something a little more regular with
it.
these
Yes,
conversations. And
yes,
yeah, so if you guys
yes,
liked what you hear tonight, know that Amber and I are working towards having these conversations on the regular. So
yes. All Auron's information is going to be listed. So if you want to go learn more about what he does or talk to him or work with him, then you will find that information all in the description. So if there's something you want to hear us talk about, please let us know.
oh yeah, we've got a good list going so far. So awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me along to open these conversations up, and I really appreciate our new friendship and everything that we are going to be creating in the not so distant future.
Yes, thank you. All right, guys, have an amazing day. The content provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The intention of the host and guests is to spread love and awareness. Always seek the advice of your physician or trusted healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard in this podcast. Before we wrap it up, I've got some podcast gems for you. We have Heather Harrington's Hot Mess Espresso. Her resilience and vibrant energy are just what you need on your healing journey. Also, give a listen to Hunter Allen's Everything is Connected podcast for some refreshing insights on emotional intelligence and mental health. Please go check them out. You definitely won't be disappointed.